Our next inductee is Flying Fred Curry. And here to induct Fred Curry is our own professor, Tom Burke.
Thank you, Rich. As I look out in the crowd here, I see some happy faces, and they should be happy because I'm going to have the honor and the privilege of inducting a long time friend. 3 years ago, I had the honor to induct into the New England Wrestling Hall of Fame the originator of hardcore wrestling, Wild Bull Curry. Today, I have that honor and am very humbled of inducting Bull's son, Fred Curry. How does the son of a legend compete against his famous father? Well, for one thing, he did not inherit Bull Curry's looks. A matter of fact, his looks placed him and his natural wrestling ability earned him a road of stardom as a top babyface wherever he went. When you're growing up with a dad who is a wrestler, you are bound to meet his friends. And with great envy, I can just imagine how it was on those summer vacations when he would be with his dad in places like Nova Scotia, Texas, Michigan, Quebec, and all over, meeting his dad's friends, such as Lou Thez, Killer Kowalski, Duke Kiyomoto, Don Leo Jonathan, Danny Hodge, Danny McShane, Dr. Jerry Graham, the Vachons, Mad Dog and Butcher, Cowboy Len Hughes, and the Syrian, who was his dad's tag team partner, the Sheik. It was when he met the Sheik, the Syrian madman turned around and said to Fred, "Come visit me in Detroit, and I'll put you to work." He was only like 15 at the time. 10 years later, he was working for the Sheik in Detroit. But even before his ring work as a wrestler, he had been doing some ref work in Nova Scotia during the summer when his dad was on tour for Cowboy Len Hughes, the promoter. Side note, Cowboy Len Hughes was built from my hometown, Springfield, Mass. We have a lot of cowboys there. Upon graduating from UConn with a degree in education, he was a star football player for 3 years and captain of his football team in the last season. It was that football background and his contact with wrestling promoter Tony Santos that put him in the ring as a professional wrestler. And he was billed as Fred Curry, not Curry at the time. After a season with Santos, he took an offer up from the Detroit Madman, the Sheik, and magic was made. He became a fan favorite. It was during a televised studio wrestling broadcast hosted by Lord Athol Layton, which made Fred a top babyface in Detroit. Fred's favorite move was the drop kick. It was during a match that Lord Layton started to count the drop kicks. 1, 2, 3, 4, and boom, it went up to 21 drop kicks on one opponent. And who was that opponent? The opponent became a very, very famous person in wrestling, Bobby Heenan. Fred came home over the Thanksgiving Christmas season in 1967 and was booked by Tony Santos, hitting a few towns here and there. It was while he was working for Santos that he met a young Texan and struck a friendship which lasted all their life. He liked the young kid, and the young kid was hungry. Those paydays for Santos wasn't the best. Fred said he would talk to the booker when he got back to Detroit. Fred gets back to Detroit after the holidays. He puts a bug in the booker's ear, and another month passes, and all of a sudden, an American dream is made. Dusty Rhodes debuts in Detroit. Drop kicks were not limited to Detroit, but they were also in Texas, Quebec, Hawaii, Japan, San Francisco. In 1968, he had his first NWA title shot against Gene Kaninsky at the famous Cow Palace. In a long, long tour in Australia, teaming with a future NWA champion, a young Jack Briscoe, for Jim Barnett and Johnny Doyle. In the mid-70s, a part of wrestling history that has been kind of lost, the Sheik's TV started to be shown in various areas outside the Detroit network. A matter of fact, it was also seen right up the street here in Worcester, Mass. On Channel 27. The invasion of the Sheik took place in Arizona, New Mexico, Minnesota, Alaska, as well as other areas. Fred continued to wrestle, but he also started to run some towns in Ohio. Soon, and his partner, business partner that is, Bobo Brazil, had a circuit running cards in Ohio, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Indiana, while TV was providing the niche for a wrestling area that was being neglected. He has always been a savvy businessman. Must be something that was instilled in his DNA from his ancestors from Lebanon, hawking their wares in the bazaars. Like in the movie The Godfather, he was offered a deal. He could not refuse it. He left wrestling to work in the hotel business, which was in Columbus, Ohio, and properties in Florida. A few years after his father passed, Fred returned to New England, to his home state of Connecticut, with his wife, his son Fred, Michael, and Nicholas, where they now reside. Today, this former Yukon gridiron, a dropkick artist bar none, husband, father, and more recently, a wrestling trainer for his youngest son, Nicholas, soon to be known as a ring name, Kid Curry. It is an sincere honor for me to induct a friend of 40 years into the New England Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame, Flyin, Fred Curry. I'd also like to have Nick, Rocket, Michael.
Did I do all that? Well, I'll tell you something. This feels really, really good. Because I'm here talking about wrestling. I got to tell you one thing. You know, when I got into business, I was lucky to have a wrestling icon like Wild Bull Curry as a dad. He opened a lot of doors for me, and I took advantage of every one. One place I got to tell you, I went to Detroit, and I wrestled in the country, the chic country, I call it. As no country for old men. I mean, we had the top stars in the country there. We had at that time Ernie the Cat Ladd, Bobo Brazil, Asax Calhoun. Every top star there was wrestled in Detroit. And I tell you, you really had to have a lot of energy to survive that, especially with the Sheik. I mean, he was on top of you every minute. But I'd like to tell you another guy that meant a lot in my career, and that was when I went to Texas. A guy I wrestled with and against many times, Fritz von Erich. He is one of the, to me, he was the Renoir of the wrestling game. I mean, this guy had timing, he could talk, and he could have a match with a broomstick. This guy was so good, believe me. You know, and it was a great privilege and honor to wrestle with him. You know, now I'm training, you know, as he put, I'm training Nick, I'm training another. They got a nice background in amateur wrestling. They've been on championship teams, and they were starting varsity players. So, I mean, they got a good basis, and, you know, Nick's going to be, when I'm done with him, if he survives, maybe probably one of the top guys in the country. And I'm sure going to make it give it a good try in there. But I like to say, it's not like because I like the kid, I don't. That's the way it goes. He doesn't either. But, you know, we're stuck with him. And, you know, and I had another boy that was in the wrestling too, the Rocket. Very, very good. But the trouble with him, he was too good looking for the ring. So now he's a bartender. But anyway, you know, after I was done with him, I was done with this. And one thing I got to mention, that I was really lucky enough to get Pro Wrestling Illustrated 1972 most popular wrestler in the world. And I shared that with my Australian partner, Jack Briscoe. But that was a great time for us. And I like to say, you know, I'm not going to take a lot of you guys' time, but, you know, for all the wrestlers throughout the years, and for all the great fans in wrestling, I salute you. Without you guys, we were nothing. And I'd like to give a big salute to the management here. They had a real first-class event that I was very happy to be at and very honored. And I thank you for this award, and good luck to everybody.
Thank you, Rich. Congratulations, Mr. Curry.